Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the hush of moonlit stone corridors, where the air smells faintly of wax and damp stone. We'll peek behind velvet curtains and candlelit windows, and if you're lucky, you'll spend a day in the worn-out shoes of someone chasing beauty in an age where looking perfect often meant suffering and silence. Back then, standards were harsh, unforgiving, and frankly, a little absurd. Imagine opening your eyes in a drafty chamber, your first thought being, is my skin pale enough to make people question if I'm royalty or just moments from death? The sunlight doesn't warm you, it exposes you. Dust floats through it like time itself. You narrow your eyes and already you've made a mistake. The paler the skin, the higher the rank. But heaven forbid you catch a sunbeam, a golden glow. That's the mark of someone who toils. And if you're thinking, no worries, I've got SPF, oh dear, sunscreen wasn't quite an option. Instead, you might have found yourself smearing on a concoction of vinegar, ashes, or even lead, hoping to pass as someone who's never seen the outdoors. So before we dive deeper into this cold, powdered world, take a moment if you enjoy this kind of journey to like the video and subscribe. Only if your hands aren't trembling too much from mixing up your medieval skincare routine. I genuinely love crafting these little windows into the past. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always magical seeing these stories reach you across time zones. Like candlelight traveling through the dark. Now, take a breath. Lower the lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background. Let your mind drift. The modern world fades, and suddenly you're somewhere colder, quieter, older, where silence feels heavy, and faces are studied like portraits in a gallery. And yours? Yours better be ghostly enough to turn heads. Those stiff, solemn faces you see in old paintings, they weren't just sad. They were striving for that perfect shade of porcelain pale. It was no easy feat. You rose with the rooster, already bracing for the sun like it was a personal attack. If you were lucky, noble, or just pretending to be, you aimed to look like you'd never so much as lifted a pail. Heaven help you if your complexion suggested you'd spent the afternoon in the fields. Because in that world, a sun-kissed glow meant one thing. You probably spent your day hauling turnips through the mud. Asterisk. Historians still argue whether this obsession was always tied to status or whether it also signaled spiritual purity. After all, the paler the nun, the more people seem to think she'd reached some level of heavenly devotion. Now you're not reaching for SPF 50. No, you're more likely mixing up a homemade concoction, because medieval sunscreen was a dangerous blend. Want to lighten your face? How about a bit of lead paste, some vinegar, and maybe a dusting of white flour? Yes, lead. In fact, the paler your skin, the more likely you are to be slowly poisoning yourself. The Venetian Cirrus, the favorite beauty cream, was basically lead mixed with vinegar, something you'd recognize today as a recipe for neurological disaster. But hey, fashion before function, right? Of course, not everyone could afford such risky luxuries. If you're a peasant, you get your pale face by default because you're probably malnourished and anemic. Congratulations, you've achieved the wasted away look naturally. Still, if you want to look even paler, there are tricks for that. Chalk, flour, or the classic, not at all unsettling egg mask, which leaves your face with the texture of a weak old loaf of bread. And while we're on the topic of pale faces, let's talk about veins. Yes, visible veins, especially blue ones, were all the rage. If you really want to turn heads in a medieval court, you'll carefully draw blue lines on your temples and hands, making your skin look even more fragile and refined. The sicker you look, the more beautiful you are. It's a beauty ideal you don't see much on Instagram now, unless there's a new Victorian consumption chic trend we haven't noticed yet. But why all this obsession with being ghostly white? The mainstream historical fact is that throughout much of medieval Europe, pale skin was a sign of wealth and privilege. Nobles didn't work in the sun. Peasants did. So to be pale was to proclaim, "I have servants for that." The whiter the skin, the further removed you were from physical labor, and by extension from poverty. Still, historians debate whether this standard was always as rigid as we imagine, or whether there were moments and regions where rosy cheeks and a sun-kissed glow crept in as marks of health. That didn't stop people from taking desperate measures. For the upper crust, every morning was a battle. You can almost picture Lady Elena perched at her vanity, dabbing white lead to her face, holding her breath as a maid draws those blue lines on her delicate wrists. The goal isn't to look alive, but to look just this side of being an artfully preserved corpse. One wrong move, a little too much sun, and suddenly your marriage prospects plummet. The quirky tidbit here, some medieval folks went so far as to bleed themselves, yes, with leeches or knives to remove the redness from their cheeks and achieve that ultra-pale look. If you've ever called a beauty routine painful, just remember, at least it doesn't involve a bucket of leeches and a hope that you don't pass out. Meanwhile, the church wasn't technically helping matters. Medieval sermons sometimes compared pale skin to purity of soul, a clean, untarnished vessel. The whiter your skin, the less touched by sin you seemed. At least according to those thundering preachers who probably never applied lead, paste but enjoyed a good metaphor. Historians still argue whether these religious attitudes directly influenced beauty rituals or if both just happened to converge in the same slightly alarming direction. Of course, there were exceptions. Sometimes regional, sometimes just personal. In Mediterranean climates, a bit of sun on your cheeks wasn't always scandalous. And folk traditions occasionally praised the apple-cheeked country maiden. But try telling that to the bored court ladies in Paris or London who spent whole afternoons in dimly lit rooms to avoid even the faintest tan. The joke? They probably missed the sun almost as much as they missed a decent dental plan. You trudge through a medieval marketplace, noticing how women tucked themselves into the shadioff overhanging wooden stalls, ducking out of sunlight like startled bats. Even the children are trained. Cover your face, their mothers hiss, dashing across a muddy road, clutching homemade sun shields, which are really just scraps of linen, or in a pinch, their own hands. But there's a darker side to all this. The desperate pursuit of paleness led to real suffering. Lead poisoning was not uncommon. Symptoms included everything from skin rashes and stomach pain, to tremors, and eventually madness. The saddest part? Most women didn't even realize their beauty potions were slowly killing them. All they knew was that their friends admired their ghost-pale skin right up until it turned gray and brittle. Beauty, back then, came with a deadly price tag. Today, we chase bronzed skin and golden glow. But centuries ago, it was the opposite. Looking like you'd never seen the sun was the goal. You'd spend hours mixing a strange, toxic paste, risking your health and your bed linens just to avoid being mistaken for a commoner. And men? Oh, they weren't exempt. At court, nobles needed that same pale, almost see-through complexion. Too much color, and you might be confused for a soldier. Or worse, someone who worked. Many powdered their faces in secret, trying to chase the same ghostly glow dot in your dim bedroom. You'd check them aurorally, just a polished bit of metal for signs of redness. Was the paste even? Were your veins visible enough? Maybe tomorrow, you'd look just pale enough to be safe, because beauty wasn't a hobby. It was a full-time job. A daily battle against sunlight, aging, and the suspicion that maybe all of this pain, poison, Borode might make you not just beautiful, but just a little more worthy. And if your skin passed the test, there was still your forehead to consider. Yes, your forehead. In medieval Europe, the higher it was, the better. Women plucked, shaved, even burned away baby hairs to chase that shining stretch of skin. Modern eyebrows? Forget them. This was medieval landscaping. This fashion wasn't just for women. though ladies certainly led the trend. You'd see highborn women in their bedchambers, squinting by the firelight, tweezers in hand, wincing as they tug out hair after hair. Some even enlisted their maids for the task, turning hair, plucking into an after-dinner ritual. If you want to be beautiful, you must endure. There's even an old saying, beauty knows no pain. In medieval times, pain was more of a guarantee than a risk. Mainstream historical fact. Paintings from the 5th-10th century, like those of Verrogal, Woodville, or even the famed Mona Lisa, show impossibly high foreheads. Sometimes so smooth and broad, you wonder if the artist just got bored of drawing hair. It was a real trend. Artists didn't just make this up. They reflected the standards of their era. But here's the quirky tidbit. The medieval recipe books didn't stop at simple plucking or shaving. Some recommended using a mixture of walnut oil and vinegar as a sort of ancient enwy intended to discourage hair from growing back. Others suggested rubbing in burnt barley or even cat dung. Imagine waking up each day, deciding whether you'd rather have stubble or smell faintly of barnyard. Talk about a beauty routine with character. And just when you think you've finished, the fashion moves again. If your eyebrows are too close to your hairline, you'll need to start thinning them too. Some women went so far as to scrape back the skin, searching for every last trace of fuzz. The only thing more dangerous than failing to achieve the look was succeeding, since infection, irritation, and scars were all too common side effects. Medieval beauty products weren't exactly FDA approved. Historians still argue whether Thishae Ferehead obsession came from the influence of certain royal courts, maybe France or Italy, where new fashion spread quickly, or whether it was more about distinguishing the civilized from the rustic. After all, if you have the time and money to devote to endless grooming, you're probably not busy churning butter. As you wander the castle halls, you notice other women, all with their hair tightly bound under hoods or veils, their foreheads gleaming and bare. Some look proud, some sheepish, and some just look tired. You realize that just as with skin tone, these standards create a kind of secret code. One glance and you know who belongs and who doesn't. The irony? Sometimes men joined in as well, especially those involved in courtly life or portraiture. There are records of knights and even clergy, smoothing their hairlines, eager to look intellectual. There's a joke that if you lived back then and your family had a particularly low hairline, you'd probably be the talk of the village, and not in a good way. Look at that fellow, someone might whisper at the market. His hair starts halfway down. His face, unthinkable. Yet, for every trend, there's a cost. Those caustic pastes and homebrew potions weren't gentle. Many women developed sores or permanent bald patches, and some found themselves unable to grow hair ever again. You can almost imagine the awkward family dinner. Mother, why is your forehead sword? Never you mind, darling, just pass the leeches. Here's a fun callback for you. Remember the lead-based lotions from Section 1? Imagine combining those with an acidic hair remover, then trying to smile gracefully at a banquet. The truth is, nobody probably looked as serene as their portraits suggest. Behind the scenes, beauty hurt, and it showed. But let's not give the upper classes all the credit for wild beauty rituals. Even peasant women who couldn't afford walnut oil or imported tweezer sometimes participated using sharpened sticks or even clamshells. Ingenuity at its finest. If it removes hair, it's good. Enough. The scholarly debate continues. Did these standards truly trickle down to the countryside? Or did peasants just laugh at the rich behind closed doors? Some folk stories suggest that village women mocked the highbrow city ladies, claiming only those with something to hide would scrape away so much of their own hair, so much for solidarity. Still, the pressure remains. The higher your forehead, the more people believe you're wise, noble, and let's be honest, a little bit intimidating. Even now, if you catch a glimpse of yourself in a modern mirror, You might wonder if you'd have survived the medieval makeover. And for a final odd detail, some medieval beauty experts recommended wearing a cap or band across the hairline overnight, supposedly to train the hair to stay back. The result, you'd wake up with a crease across your forehead, and if you were unlucky, less hair than you started with. Fashion meets futility. In medieval times, beauty was a moving target. One year, it was all about the high forehead. The next, something else entirely. As you drift into sleep, forehead still stinging from endless plucking. A quiet thought lingers. All this pain for a trend that might vanish by next season. Historians still wonder if people truly believed these standards were natural. Or if, deep down, everyone knew it was just a way to separate nobles from commoners. You roll over in your straw-filled mattress and think, if only they had Instagram. Maybe there'd be Forehead Friday. Maybe a tutorial for brow-widening hacks. But the candle flickers. The castle quiets. And with your freshly plucked brow, you're left with only your thoughts. Beauty hurts. But sometimes, it's just strange. Lying there in the dark, you remember. It's not just your face. The ultimate medieval beauty symbol? Long, impossibly glossy hair like silk in the summer wind, rippling beneath candlelight. For women, hair was everything. The longer, thicker, and shinier, the better. It wasn't just decoration, it was status. A kind of currency. Carefully braided or tucked under wraps if you were married. Shown off like treasure if you were looking for a match. But growing hair, like that wasn't easy. With poor diets, stress, and questionable hygiene, your body often had other plans. Still, long hair was idolized in poems and portraits, praised like spun gold or woven silk. Some noblewomen never cut it. Except maybe once in childhood, or as punishment, or during illness. The rest of the time, you treated your hair like a prized garden, despite the lice, the split ends, and the regrettable homemade tonics. If you were lucky, you'd rinse with boiled herbs, rosemary, lavender, maybe rose petals. If not, well, there's always vinegar and hope. If not, you're stuck with basic soap. Harsh, lie heavy, and more likely to turn your hair into straw than silk. A good hair day in medieval Europe is a rare and celebrated thing. And you can bet people notice. Your hair looks almost clean is genuinely a compliment. But here's the quirky tidbit. Hair pieces and fake plaits were not just for the super rich. Plenty of women resorted to padded rolls, hair extensions made from goat or horsehair, or even discarded human hair gathered by enterprising maids from combs and brushes. If you've ever worried about extensions showing at a party, just imagine your neighbor glancing over and noticing your brand new braid smells faintly equestrian. Some women even went as far as to dye their hair with risky brews, saffron for a hint of gold, walnut husk for chestnut brown, or light a strip color entirely. The results were unpredictable, but the effort always monumental. So you sit trying to coax your hair into a possible braid, wincing as the comb snags. And if your hair isn't long enough, well, you can fake it. There are stories of women saving their own shed hair all year, twisting it into rats, hair cushions, not the rodent. Although with medieval cleanliness, who can say for sure to pat out their buns or rolls? The more elaborate your hairstyle, the more status you broadcast. For men, the rules shift. In some eras, knights sported flowing locks symbolic of strength and vitality. In others, fashion demanded a neat bob or tonsure, a monk's classic shaved crown. But for both sexes, hair was a statement, and the pressure to keep up appearances never quite faded. Historians still argue whether these elaborate hair rituals were strictly enforced, or mostly reserved for high society. Did village girls with bobbed hair feel left out, or did they just laugh at the silly trends of the nobility? Some medieval manuscripts suggest that even farm girls took pride in their hair, using simple oils when they could get them and borrowing styles seen at church festivals. But the stakes for noble women were higher. Imagine being judged not just for your virtues, but for how glossy your hair looked in firelight. Marriage negotiations could hinge on it. Suitors might ask about your hair before your family's fortune. There's even a record of one 15th century Italian countess refusing to attend a feast because a sudden mishap left her with a lopsided braid. There's an open scholarly debate about whether these beauty standards were genuinely oppressive or if, for some, they offered a rare chance for self-expression in a rigid world. Did some women relish the chance to outgrade their rivals to gather admiring glances at the May Day fair? Or did most of them, like you, just sigh at the endless fuss, the pain of combing, the threat of lice, and the embarrassment of the occasional rat's nest? And that brings us to hygiene. Because with all this hair comes trouble. Medieval combs made of bone or wood were precious objects, sometimes passed down through generations. Lice were common, so daily combing became both necessity and ritual. If your hair ever became truly infested, you might shave your head altogether and start over. Though, if you were noble, you'd cover this up as best you could with a wimple, hood, or veil. Bad Hair Day takes on a whole new meaning when it lasts for weeks. Then there are the styles. Across Europe, you see everything. Tight buns, elaborate plaits wound with ribbons or beads, flowing curls for the lucky few who had them naturally, and for the very fashionable, hair netted in gold or silver. Thread. If you could afford it, you hired a servant just for your hair. If not, well, you made do. And sometimes making do involved mud and spit to hold a style together. That's right. Hair gel was occasionally a handful of earth mixed with a prayer. Take that modern beauty influences. One light joke to lighten the load. Ever hear of hair of the dog? In medieval times, the phrase might have meant literally tying stray animal hairs into your braid for volume. The trend never really caught. On with the canon extensives. Another fun fact, some women, to display the length and health of their hair, only revealed it in private or on special occasions. There's even evidence that a maiden's uncovered hair was considered so alluring that it was only permitted for young, unmarried women in church. Married women kept their hair hidden at all times. It was scandalous for a wife to let her hair down in public. The phrase meant something a bit more literal back then. All of this comes with a heavy dose of competition. Whether at a village festival or a royal banquet, you're always aware of who's got the shiniest, longest locks, who's using the newest hair tonic, who arrived with an extra plated twist this season. If you ever thought beauty was exhausting in the modern world, try doing it with lice lead and no Instagram filters. The scholarly debate continues. Did these standards filter down to all levels of society? Some historians say yes, pointing to folk traditions and village tailies. Others argue that for many hair was simply practical, tied back for work and only styled for church or festival days. What's clear is that for those who could afford it and those who aspired to climb the social ladder, hair care was an endless, intricate, and occasionally absurd quest. And as you finally fall asleep, hair tangled but heart a little lighter, you can't help but feel a glimmer of camaraderie with those medieval women. Across the centuries, the tools and styles may change, but the desire to be seen, admired, and sometimes just to fit in remains. You re-ack up, patch your own hair, and promise yourself no more horsehair extensions. At least not tonight. You're waking again, or at least shifting in your bed of straw and wool. And now you realize your face and hair aren't the only things up for scrutiny. In the candle-lit world of the Middle Ages, your entire silhouette is judged, especially your waistline. You might assume corsets are an invention of the later centuries, but the truth is, medieval folk already had plenty of tricks for squeezing themselves into ideal shape, and it's rarely comfortable. The era's poetry and art praised slender waists, gently swelling hips, and a delicate, almost frail figure for women. Never mind that most peasants have bodies built by years of work and bread. Nobility, though, were expected to look soft, willowy, and somehow ethereal, not strong, not muscular, not robust, just fragile enough to make anyone worry you'd blow away in a stiff breeze. Mainstream historical fact. By the 13th and 14th centuries, fitted gowns became a height of fashion for upper-class women. These gowns were tailored close to the torso, laced tightly at the sides or back, and constructed to show off a narrow waist. The cotehardie, a fitted dress, became especially popular. If you're a noble woman, your maid might spend half an hour each morning yanking laces tight and fussing over the smoothness of your bodice. But here's the quirky tidbit. Before the age of whalebone corsets, people stuffed garments with reeds, tow flax fibers, or even bundles of moss to shape their figure. Some women wore padded rolls or bum rolls around the hips to exaggerate the difference between waist and hip, creating that coveted hourglass look. If it squished, poked, or made you walk funny, it was probably in fashion at some point. You tug at the laces of your dress, sucking in your stomach as your maid cinches the sides tighter. Breathe in, no tighter. The goal isn't comfort, it's appearance. Don't worry about eating a hearty meal. There's no room for it now. Many a lady skipped breakfast and lunch just to maintain the illusion. If you faint at church, people might call it delicate constitution. But more likely, it's just the lack of food and the lack of space to breathe. Historians still argue whether these extreme silhouettes were really enforced on all women, or whether the trend was reserved for a few ultra-fashionable courts in France, Burgundy, or Italy. Some records show working women wore their gowns looser simply for practicality's sake. But one thing is certain, as soon as you set foot near nobility, the pressure is on. You know those images in illuminated manuscripts of women with impossibly slender torsos? That wasn't all artistic license. Some women did everything possible to appear slim, layering, lacing, and even slouching to trick the eye. There are tales of young girls being trained to stand and move gracefully with books balanced on their heads and heavy wooden boards tied to their backs to teach straight posture and the proper way to carry themselves. Let's pause for a joke. Ever try to run in a tightly laced dress? Don't. Not unless you want to trip over your own feet, rip a seam, and end up the talk of the castle. Lady Marjorie fell again, should have loosened her laces. But the obsession didn't stop at the waist. Flat stomachs, small busts, and narrow shoulders were in vogue at various times. Some women resorted to tight undergarments. Linen bands wound around the chest, squeezing everything down and in. The look was youthful and pure, though the comfort level was somewhere between sleeping on rocks and hugging a tree trunk. There's also the ever-popular belt slung low on the hips, studded with gems or intricate metalwork. A belt wasn't just an accessory, it was a status symbol. The fancier the belt, the more people assumed you were important. Sometimes these belts were gifts from husbands to wives, a not-so-subtle reminder to stay trim. Talk about pressure. Men, meanwhile, weren't entirely off the hook. While bulk was a sign of wealth, think robust, barrel-chested kings, there was also an expectation, especially among the young and fashionable, to appear athletic, but not too muscular. The real prize was to look noble. Not sweaty, not sunburned. Just perpetually ready for a courtly dance. There's an open scholarly debate on whether body-shaping clothing like stays and padding were common, or if most people just made do with what their bodies naturally looked like. Some scholars argue that many depictions in art are aspirational. No one really looked like that, but everyone pretended. But for those in the middle of the social pyramid, the stress was real. Young women preparing for marriage, hopeful men aiming for court posts. All of them watched, compared, and sometimes suffered. There's even a story of one duchess who had extra ribs removed, or so the gossip went, to achieve a wasp waist. Historians say this is probably a myth, but it speaks volumes about what people thought possible or expected. Quirky tidbit number 2. For those unable to shape themselves physically, some turn to illusion. There are records of artists painting Shadowy lines on skin or undergarments to fake a slimmer figure. The earliest contouring, perhaps. Imagine powdering yourself before a big event, not for the face, but to shade a fake AB muscle or a sharper collarbone. The commitment was real. And let's not forget the stories of miracle waters and slimming potions peddled by traveling quacks. Some recipes were harmless, just herbs and water, but others included dangerous ingredients like mercury or arsenic. Yes, for a smaller waist, some people risk their lives. It makes you grateful that today's diet fads rarely come with an actual skull and crossbones label. The scholarly debate continues. Did these deadly concoctions really work? Or were people just fooled by a placebo effect, and maybe a few days of being violently ill? We'll never know for sure, but one thing is clear. If someone told you it would make you slimmer, you'd probably try it. Yet not everyone played along. Some women, especially in rural areas, rejected the tight-laced look, instead tying their belts loosely and embracing their working bodies. There are peasant dances depicted in art, where women wear loose, colorful skirts, spinning with wild abandon. Not every medieval beauty standard filtered down to the hayfields. For those who did endure the laces and rolls and endless pressure to appear fragile, there were compensations, attention, better marriage prospects, a sense of belonging to the in crowd, but it was exhausting. By evening, as you finally unlaced your gown, you'd sigh with relief and rub the red marks from your ribs, promising yourself that tomorrow we'd loosen up just a bit. But then you remember, tomorrow is the May Day festival, and everyone will be watching. You'll wake early, struggle into your dress, and try not to faint during Mass. Beauty may be pain, but in the Middle Ages it was also a full-time job, one with very little room for snacks. As you drift off, you think about the strange things people did to fit in. How the shape of your waist could change your whole life, or at least how people saw you. And as the moon rises over the castle and you curl up, body still aching from a day of beauty, you wonder if it was all worth it. Tomorrow, maybe you'll tie your belt loose and dance with the peasants. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll invent sweatpants a few centuries early. You roll to your side, half cocooned in scratchy linen, and feel the pinch of your shoes. Yes, those shoes. Because tonight you're not just a head of hair, a one face, or a corseted waist, but a pair of dainty feet squished and shuffled into a pointy-toed nightmare. The medieval beauty ideal forefeet is, let's say, uniquely punishing. The smaller and more delicate, the better. Forget comfort. If your toes aren't tingling with pain, you're not doing it right. Imagine stepping out of bed already bracing yourself for the squeeze. If you're a noble, your shoes aren't practical boots or sturdy sandals. No, your prized possession is a pair of Pulaine. Shoes with tips so long and narrow that walking is a calculated risk. Some pananes, also called croquets, have toes that extend 6, 8, even 12 in past the actual foot dot, sometimes supported with little whalebone or wire stays, so the points won't drag sadly behind you. The longer the toe, the higher your status until inevitably the king or the church declares a moral panic and tries to ban them for being too outrageous. Mainstream historical fact. In the 14th and 15th centuries, pointy shoes were all the rage in courts from Paris to Prague. Lawmakers and priests alike decried them as symbols of vanity, pride, and danger to morals. Some towns even passed laws restricting how long the points could be, especially for commoners. If you're caught with poulins beyond the permitted length, you might be fined or, more humiliatingly, have your shoes cut down in public. Picture the scene: a burly town constable snipping your fancy tips while the market crowd giggles. For women, shoes often meant balancing on fragile platforms called patterns, especially if you had to wade through muddy streets. Patterns could raise you several inches above the muck, but at the price of stability. No wonder medieval cities rang with the clatter of wooden soles and the occasional squeal of someone losing their balance and tumbling into the filth. The quirky tidbit: People got creative to cheat the standards. Some stuffed the toes of their shoes with wool or even sand, so their feet wouldn't slide forward and crumple painfully. There are tales of court jesters secretly filling a rival's shoes with pebbles as a prank. Nothing like watching Lady Marjorie hobble across the Great Hall with a forced smile, all in the name of Bodhi. But it's not just the shape of your shoes. It's your actual feet. Small, arched, and dainty are the gold standard. And if you're cursed with a wide or long foot, you do what you can to disguise it. Some women wrap their toes tightly at night, hoping to mold their feet into daintier forms. There's no historical evidence of full-on foot binding in medieval Europe like in other parts of the world. But the pressure to have pretty feet is real. And if you're born into the wrong gene pool, well, there are plenty of prayers to St. Crispin, patron of cobblers, for a reason. Historians still argue whether these tortuous shoes were truly everyday wear for most people, or if they were reserved for special occasions and the wealthiest nobles. After all, if you spend your days in fields or workshops, you need to actually walk. But for the aspiring and ambitious at court, in town, or during feasts, the pointier the better. There's a theory that a person's worth could be measured in inches of leather trailing from their toes. Let's break for a light joke. Ever try running in pananes? It's less dash and more awkward shuffle with a 50% chance of tripping over your own status symbol. Medieval party games probably included a race around the manor. Winner gets to keep their dignity and maybe their shoes. Still, not every beauty trend gets you noticed in a good way. Sometimes the fallout is literal. Patterns wobble, pananes snag on stairs, and by the end of a long feast, you're just grateful to pull your aching feet free and wiggle your toes by the earth. Medieval folk might not have invented high heels, but they were masters of uncomfortable footwear. And yes, even then, people gossiped. Did you see Lady Joan limping? Her shoes must be new, or she's just trying too hard again. If you're a man, especially a young, ambitious one, the pressure is no less. A long pointed shoe was a sign that you didn't have to work, run, or do much of anything practical. Status was everything, and if it cost you a few blisters, so be it. There are records of young men in London and Paris spending entire paychecks on imported Italian leather shoes, hoping to attract notice at festivals or market days. Of course, footwear is one thing, but socks, not quite what you'd expect. Wealthier folk had hose, tight-fitting, brightly colored, and sometimes lined with fur or padded for shape. The tighter the hose, the better. At one point, the craze for cod pieces, padded or decorative flaps covering the groin, led to an arms race in hosiery, with men vying to display not just their feet, but their, well, let's just say their courage. That too became a sort of beauty standard, a peacock display of masculinity, the open scholarly debate. How far did these fashion extremes really spread? Were peasants saving for a fancy pair of shoes for feast days? Or were these trends strictly for the 1%? Some evidence suggests festival days, or even the humblest folk trying out the latest look, if only for the fun of it. Shoes could be deadly too. Poor construction meant broken ankles, twisted knees, and the risk of infection from wounds. There are stories, half history, half cautionary tale, of young men dying of gangrene from a blister gone bad, all because they wanted to impress the daughter of the local baker. But not all shoes were disasters. In the countryside, people favored practical footwear, simple boots, sandals, or going barefoot in warm months. There's a folk saying, barefoot in summer, rich in spirit. A gentle jab at city folk who traded comfort for class. Some villages even held foot races where showing up in pens would guarantee instant mockery. The quirkiest tidbit. In some regions, the shape of your shoe could signal your politics. The supporters of certain lords or guilds might wear distinctively shaped or decorated footwear, making your feet a kind of medieval bumper sticker. Imagine the town square. Oh, look at those round-toed shoes. Must be from the wrong side of the river. It's not all misery, of course. Some clever cobblers crafted shoes with hidden pockets or charms stitched into the soles believed to bring luck, love, or ward off evil spirits. Kids played games by trading shoe buttons or racing to see who could slide their patterns the farthest without falling. Even in a world obsessed with perfection, people found ways to turn discomfort into a little fun. By nightfall, when you finally kick off your shoes and let your feet throb in peace, you marvel at the lengths, literally and figuratively, people went to fit the medieval ideal. Sometimes you wonder if anyone really thought it was worth it. But tomorrow, when it's time for market day, you'll cram your toes right back in. Because the world, then as now, is always watching. As you drift off again, feet tingling with phantom pains, you promise yourself that just for tonight, you'll appreciate the comfort of bare feet and soft grass, even if only in your dreams. You stretch your sore toes beneath the covers, thankful for a moment of comfort. But your mind drifts to another strange quirk of medieval beauty: teeth. If you thought medieval folks spent their days with pearly whites gleaming in every candle lit hall, think again. The reality is a mouthful of perfect teeth wasn't always the dream. In some circles, bad teeth, even ones that hinted at wealth's sweet rewards, were actually admired. Mainstream historical fact: sugar, that rare and expensive commodity, was introduced to Europe from the Middle East around the 11th century, becoming widely available to the rich by the late Middle Ages. Only nobles and the wealthiest merchants could afford it in any quantity. So for a brief and peculiar period, blackened or rotting teeth could actually be a subtle sign of affluence. Your sweet tooth quite literally became a status symbol. You wake to find yourself in a noble's manor, and breakfast is a lavish spread of preserved fruits, honey cakes, and if you're lucky, imported candied ginger. The air is thick with the scent of sugar, precious, expensive, and reserved for those who can afford a dentist, which, spoiler, hardly existed. To enjoy sick treats is a mark of privilege. But here's the catch: all that sugar means cavities, aches, and a smile that could scare the crows from the fields. The quirky tidbit: some medieval ladies inspired by the dental decay of the elite are rumored to have blackened their teeth on purpose, using burnt herbs or powdered charcoal, hoping to fake the sweet life. It's a medieval version of designer ripped jeans, except with more toothaches and less street cred. And while sugar might give you fashionable bad teeth, the rest of society did what they could to keep theirs healthy, or at least intact. Medieval dental hygiene was a patchwork of old wives' tales and wishful thinking. You might chew on twigs or rinse with wine or vinegar. And if you could afford it, you'd buy tooth powders made from crushed herbs, salt, or even ground oyster shell. If something really hurt, the barber surgeon, yes, the guy who cuts your hair and your boils, might offer to yank the offending tooth with pliers. No anesthetic, just a mug of Alliand, a prayer. Historians still argue about how bad dental health actually was. Some studies suggest many medieval folk had surprisingly strong teeth, thanks to diets low in processed sugar and high in coarse bread and vegetables. Others point to skulls full of holes and abscesses as evidence that tooth pain was a near constant companion for all classes. Here's a joke to lighten the mood. Why did Lady Elena always smile with her mouth closed? She didn't want anyone to know she was richer than the king, or that she had a mouth full of holes. It wasn't all about status, though. For some, healthy teeth were a must, especially for workers, soldiers, and anyone who needed all their mers to chew tough bread and dried meat. If you lost too many teeth, you'd find eating a challenge. Some folk remedies involve tying a frog to your jaw to draw out the pain, or sleeping with garlic cloves tucked in your cheek. The effectiveness is, let's say, open to debate. A quick aside: toothaches weren't just uncomfortable. They could be deadly infections, sometimes spread to the jaw or bloodstream, leading to swelling, fever, and death. There are cases of knights sidelined by dental problems before a battle, or nobles missing a banquet because their face was swollen to twice its size. Back to the quirks, medieval beauty standards didn't demand straight, gleaming white teeth. There were no orthodontists, no whitening strips, and certainly no braces. In fact, a gap between the front teeth, called a witch's window in some regions, was considered lucky or alluring, the sign of a good singer or a flirt. In France, they called it dents d'aubaine, lucky teeth. There are poems and love songs dedicated to ladies with charmingly gapped smiles. But for many, bad teeth meant pain, and pain was just part of life. If you had a sweet tooth and the coin to indulge it, you might pay for it with a life of dental misery. If not, you'd chew your hard bread, hope for the best, and maybe borrow. A prayer to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. Open scholarly debate. How much did people care about teeth really? Did medieval folk simply accept pain and bad breath as the cost of living? Or did they envy the fashionable decay of the wealthy? There's little agreement, and the records are patchy. Some chroniclers bemoan the rot caused by luxury, while others barely mention teeth at all. Back at your imaginary manor, you stare at a bowl of candied violets and wonder if the risk is worth it. Still, the taste is heavenly. A brief sugary escape from daily drudgery. The party continues, the wine flows, and you can almost forget that tomorrow you'll wake with a jaw that throbs and a smile that's slightly less impressive than yesterday. In the countryside, peasants simply do what they must, rubbing with salt, chewing mint or sage, and hoping their teeth last. There's a strange pride in keeping your own teeth well into old age. Grandmothers with all their murs are admired as hardy and blessed, not just lucky, a final odd fact. In some places, teeth were used as talismans. Lost teeth strung on a cord became protective charms for children, or were buried in the garden to ward off evil spirits. Teeth held power even if you didn't love how yours looked. As you finally drift off, mouth aching in sympathy for those who came before, you marvel at the weirdness of a world where rot could be chic and a good smile might mean anything but perfect white. You whisper thanks for your toothbrush and maybe, just maybe, vow to skip dessert tomorrow. You're resting your jaw, grateful for the break from sugar-coated status. Symbols when your focus drifts upward. Eyebrows. You might think the medieval brow was just a bit of furrowed mystery above the eyes. But oh, how wrong you'd be, in the candle lit smoky halls of the Middle Ages. Your eyebrows could make or break your entire look. It's not just about having them. It's about having the right kind. Imagine peering into your polished bronze mirror, candle guttering beside you, and noticing your brows look, well, normal, not good enough. For a few wild centuries, the perfect brow is almost invisible, plucked until they're little more than a whisper, a ghost of a line, or sometimes vanished altogether. The high forehead look you endured in Section 2. The brow follows suit, tweezed and scraped to a frail suggestion hovering above that porcelain expanse. The higher and more barely there, the more you fit the current ideal. Mainstream historical fact. Across much of late medieval Europe, especially in the 5th-10th century, fashion-forward noble women plucked their brows ruthlessly, echoing the style immortalized in paintings. There are endless portraits of queens and ladies whose foreheads seem to stretch on forever, framed by a faint, almost hesitant brow. The look is so popular that even literature makes sly jokes about girls with brows like clouds, barely there, and ethereal. But not everyone followed the rules, the quirky tidbit. In some Italian and Spanish regions, dramatic painted brows had a moment of glory. If your own hair was too fair or patchy, you'd reach for a bit of lampblack or even burnt almond and sketch on an arch worthy of a saint or a villain. Some women, daring or bored or both, painted their brows in unusual shapes, dramatically peaked, almost as if surprised by life itself. Men, too, occasionally joined in, shading or accentuating their brows for portraits or big public events. It wasn't just plucking either. Recipes from medieval beauty books recommend concoctions of honey, vinegar, or even the juice of green walnuts to thin the hair, making plucking less painful. Debatable. Others suggested rubbing the skin with pumice. Stone, chasing the impossible dream of brow's beauty. You might suffer a little redness, a few scabs, but fashion is fashion. There's an open scholarly debate about why the invisible brow trend took hold. Was it simply about following the lead of royal courts, or was there a deeper symbolism? Foreheads as seats of wisdom and bare skin as a sign of purity and intellect. Some art historians argue that broad, smooth foreheads suggested innocence or spiritual openness, while others claim it was just another way to separate the rich who could afford endless grooming from everyone else. Yet, as with all beauty standards, the tides inevitably shift. In some regions, especially in later centuries, thick arched brows come back into favor. There's a practical reason for this. If you're outside all day, a strong brow keeps sweat and dust from stinging your eyes. Some peasant girls kept their brows thick, and country tales abound of young men falling for the lass with the dark honest brow. Even in the big cities, you'd sometimes see women with fierce natural brows, usually the rebels, the outsiders, or the simply practical. Let's not forget the accidental comedy of beauty routines. One surviving letter from a young noble woman complains that she lost her favorite brow to the fire, having leaned in too close while plucking by candlelight. Another joke, why did Lady Cecily wear a hat indoors? She'd shaved her brows so far back she forgot where they belonged. The drama of the brow played out in church as well as court. For highborn girls, the pre-wedding brow ritual could involve hours of grooming, tinctures, and even a few superstitious charms. Sprinkling salt, muttering prayers for a lucky face. Some believed that the shape of your brow foretold your fate in marriage or your capacity for virtue. One popular ballad went, "A brow too sharp, a tongue too keen brings trouble to a marriage scene." But if invisible brows weren't for you, you could always paint a new pair. Recipes survive for colored powders and homemade mascara, the soot from burnt cork, the juice of berries, a smear of animal fatter's binding. The result, sometimes dazzling, sometimes disastrous. Your new brows might run in the rain, smear in the heat, or fade as quickly as your patience. Still, for one shining moment, you'd have arches like the queens of legend. Historians still argue about how much the peasantry cared for such trends. Did they sigh and pluck along with the nobles, or did they simply laugh at courtly vanities? Some village tales poke gentle fun at ladies with no brows and nowhere to put them, suggesting a healthy skepticism in the wider population. For many, eyebrows were for catching sweat, not chasing status. There's another quirky detail. In some regions, the unibrow was prized. Across the Mediterranean, a single bold brow signaled intelligence and sensuality. Girls with faint brows would smear their foreheads with coal or lampblack to fake the look, hoping to catch a suitor's eye. Even in Northern Europe, the odd tale circulates of the girl with the joined brow being courted as a rare beauty. Of course, there were always rebels. Some simply refused to pluck and wore their full dark brows like a banner. Others experimented, shaving intricate shapes or even dyeing their brows to match their hair or headdress. The brow was both a canvas and a battleground. Open scholarly debate. Did these rituals empower women, giving them control over their looks, or did they enforce another impossible standard? Some argue the medieval brow game was about agency, a way to shape your identity. Others see it as pure conformity, a painful, endless race to fit in. By the end of a long day or a longer night at the feast, your brows are sore, your patience worn thin, and your friends are debating whether you look more like a saint or a startled owl. But tomorrow, the game begins again. A new shape, a new recipe, a new hope for that perfect arch. You close your eyes, massaging your temples, and promise yourself that someday you'll let your brows do whatever they want. But for now, the standard reigns, silent, exacting, and like all medieval beauty trends, impossible to ignore. You drift a little deeper into the medieval night, the ghost of brow ache still tingling, only to realize that in this world, caring for your skin is a full-time occupation, a battle against dirt, disease, and the ever-looming demand for perfection. If you thought your modern skincare routine was a bit much, prepare yourself. Medieval beauty treatments make that 10-step serum ritual look like child's play, or maybe just child's punishment. In a time before antibiotics and actual dermatologists, your skin was both your reputation and your weakness. Every blemish whispered a secret. Too much sun, not enough money, a sleepless night, or even a sinful soul. The fairer, smoother, and more unblemished your skin, the higher your prospects, marriage, status, even spiritual credit. Meanwhile, one bad rash, a couple of pimples, or a nasty scar could turn you from courtly beauty to cautionary tale. Mainstream historical fact: medieval women and plenty of men used a dizzying array of lotions, masks, scrubs, and balms, all in the pursuit of luminous skin. Recipe books from the 14th and 15th centuries list concoctions made from almond milk, rose water, crushed pearls, egg whites, and honey, ingredients still found in some modern products. But they're joined by a parade of less savory elements: lead powder, mercury, vinegar, pig fat, snail slime, and even in the worst cases, animal dung. If you were rich, you could afford the good stuff. If you were poor, you improvised with whatever was left over after dinner. Let's be honest, a medieval spa day was less cucumber slices, more questionable chemistry set. You might start your morning with a splash of cold water straight from the well, possibly shared with a duck. Then you reach for your whitening paste, a sticky blend of egg white, flour, and vinegar. If you're truly ambitious or just a glutton for punishment, you'll slather on a brightening mask containing lead or mercury. Never mind that both slowly poison you. There's something almost poetic about risking your health for a glow that could kill. The quirky tidbit: some beauty recipes called for crocodile dung imported at great expense from the Mediterranean. Mixed with vinegar, it was spread across the skin as a kind of ancient exfoliant. This wasn't as rare as you'd hope. Apothecaries and wood doctors swore by it. Next time you complain about an odd-smelling face mask, just be glad it doesn't come with scales. But not every routine was dangerous. Almond oil, honey, oatmeal, and rosewater were relatively gentle and remain classic favorites even now. Some women used crushed violets or lies as a calming toner, and men sometimes splashed themselves with rosemary water for that freshly plucked scent. The village healer or midwife was your dermatologist, your pharmacist, and your therapist, dishing out advice for every complaint from freckles to boils. Still, skin was never just skin. A flawless face hinted at virtue, discipline, and God's favor. If you suffered from acne, eczema, or the pox the stars from Neighbors could be brutal. People believed that bad skin signaled bad character, or even a curse. Superstitions that clung to villages and court alike. Historians still argue how much medieval folk understood about cleanliness and disease. Some records show regular bathing, especially among the wealthy or in bath-loving places like Hungary and southern Germany, while others insist most people washed only their hands and faces, avoiding full immersion for fear of illness. The truth likely a mix. In some towns, public baths thrived, bustling with gossip, flirtation, and the occasional clandestine meeting. In others, water was reserved for the holy or the desperate. Bathhouses themselves were double-edged swords, places of cleanliness, but also rumored dens of sin. Laws were passed, baths shuttered, and rumors flew about what really happened behind those steamy doors. There's an open scholarly debate. Did bathing help spread the infamous plagues as some once believed? Or did the closure of baths actually Make things worse by making people dirtier? The jury is still out. The great irony, some skin problems were simply the result of the very remedies used to fix them. Lead, mercury, and arsenic-based treatments cause peeling, rashes, sores, and eventually irreversible damage. There are surviving letters from ladies at court lamenting the mysterious rot on their cheeks, unaware they're poisoning themselves every morning. You almost want to hand them a bottle of sunscreen and a pamphlet on toxicology. Let's joke for a moment. Why did Lady Agnes never worry about wrinkles? She never lived long enough to get them thanks to her daily dose of white lead. There's medieval beauty wisdom for you. Another quirky detail. Scars from smallpox, chickenpox, or injury were sometimes camouflaged with tiny bits of velvet or silk glued right onto the skin. These beauty patches could be round, star-shaped, or even crescent moons. In some cases, a courtier might wear a whole constellation of patches, each one signaling a flirtatious mood or a witty rebuke to gossip. Why, yes, I do have a scar, but now it's a fashionable crescent. Thank you very much. But if patches weren't your style, you could always try to bleed out the badness. Bloodletting, a common medical practice, was sometimes prescribed for skin complaints along with puces of moldy bread or mashed beans. The more creative the remedy, the more convinced people became. If it smells this bad, it must be working. Might have been the unofficial motto of medieval Skyner. For men, the standards weren't much gentler. Knights and scholars alike were expected to keep their faces clean, their beards trimmed or at times entirely shaved, and their skin unblemished. In some regions, a man's ability to grow a healthy beard signaled virility and honor. In others, smooth cheeks were the mark of youthful beauty. It all depended on where and when you lived. There's an open scholarly debate on whether these endless skin rituals actually improved anyone's appearance or just made the whole population a little more inventive and possibly more paranoid. Some suggest beauty recipes were a form of social bonding, a way for women to share secrets, vent, and find camaraderie. Others see it as another burden, an impossible goal set by a society obsessed with surfaces. For peasants, the goal was more basic. Stay clean enough to avoid disease, but don't waste precious resources. If you worked the fields, your hands and face were your calling cards, tanned, weathered, and honest. Some rural traditions even praised sun-kissed skin as a sign of health. And hard work, a direct challenge to the delicate palate prized at court. Another fun callback, remember the crocodile dung facial? Some village healers had their own ideas, recommending mud from sacred springs or a nightly rinse with moonlit dew. Folk remedies passed down through generations sometimes worked and sometimes made you the subject of jokes at the tavern. The beauty routines could be endless. Morning masks, midday touch-ups, nightly prayers for clear skin, all while the threat of pox, plague, and scars lingered in every shadow. If nothing else, the medieval obsession with skin reveals a universal truth. People will always chase impossible standards, often at their own expense. As the candle burns low, you find yourself thankful for your own simple routines. A little soap, a little water, and the hope that tomorrow you'll wake up blemish-free. In the quiet of the medieval night, you offer up a silent prayer for clear skin and dream of a world where beauty doesn't hurt quite so much. You turn in your sleep, wishing away memories of caustic potions and mysterious scars. But beauty in medieval life wasn't just about what you looked like. It was also about what you wore. The clothes you put on each morning were a walking advertisement of your worth, virtue, and of course, your ability to follow the ever-shifting rules of fashion. But in a world ruled by sumptu laws, the original fashion police, looking beautiful was never simply a matter of taste. It was a dangerous game of status, symbolism, and legal boundaries. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout medieval Europe, especially from the 13th century onward, Kings, queens, and councils issued sumptu laws, rules that dictated who could wear what colors, fabrics, and styles. The reason? Clothes could be powerful weapons. A lowly merchant's wife in imported silk or a peasant boy in scarlet might be mistaken for nobility. Chaos. The authorities responded by micromanaging every hemline and dye pot. Sumptuary laws varied wildly from place to place and year to year. In England, only those of a certain rank could wear man, sable, or scarlet. In Florence, the city council decreed that velvet was for the rich alone, and even then only in prescribed amounts. If you were caught breaking the rules, wearing a forbidden trim, or flaunting a prescribed color, you might be fined, shamed, or forced to surrender your beloved garment. But here's the quirky tidbit. Sumptuary laws often backfired spectacularly. Instead of quelling competition, they fueled new waves of creativity. Want forbidden's fur? Had a hidden lining? Can't wear gold embroidery? Embroider in yellow silk and wink at those in the know. There are tales of rebellious tailor and crafty housewives who stitch their family status into secret seams, outsmarting the law with every snip of the shears. As you slip into your daydream, you find yourself standing before a medieval wardrobe. What do you choose? If you're a noble, you reach for a gown of deep blue dyed with imported indigo, a pigment so precious it's worth its weight in gold. If you're less privileged, your palette is limited. Soft browns, muddy greens, faded yellows. Even your belt or shoe buckle is scrutinized. A too bright ribbon might mark you as an upstart. A fine linen shift could arouse suspicion. Historians still argue about the real impact of sumptu laws. Did most people comply, trembling before the watchful eyes of the local bailiff? Or did they ignore the rules whenever possible, trusting in luck or connections to shield them from punishment? Court records tell both stories of easons fined for a too flashy hood and of merchants who quietly paid off officials to turn a blind eye. Clothing wasn't just about status either. It was about beauty. Certain shapes were idealized. Long flowing sleeves, tight waists, elaborate hoods and veils. The fit and fall of your dress signaled not only your wealth, but your refinement. Women were expected to move with slow, careful grace. A misstep could send your elaborate train trailing through mud, undoing hours of careful dressing. The body ideal for men, a sharply cut doublet, hose that hugged the legs, a cloak with just the right drape. In Burgundy, the latest craze might be pointy hennons for women, those soaring cone-shaped hats. While in Venice, no self-respecting lady would be seen without platform shopping. Shoes so tall you needed a servant just across the room. Joke break. What's worse than tripping over your pananes? Getting stuck in a doorway because your hen is too tall. Medieval parties had their hazards. Accessories mattered as much as fabric. Jewels and embroidery were strictly controlled. A sapphire necklace could signal noble birth or dangerous ambition. Pins and brooches served double duty as both decoration and status marker. In some cases, the shape of your headgear, flat cap, hood, or veil advertised your marital status, regional roots, or even your political loyalties. For instance, a special badge or ribbon could show support for a local lord or a religious order. Clothes were a coded language, and everyone was expected to read it. Quirky detail. There were even laws about underwear. In some Italian cities, the color or quality of your shift or hose was policed just as much as your outer garments. Inspectors, yes, actual underwear police could be dispatched to weddings or festivals to make sure no one dared to wear forbidden lace or fine linen beneath their rough wool. Sumptu laws were always in part about control. Authorities worried that social climbing through fashion could upset the natural order. If a servant girl dressed like a duchess, how could you tell your betters from your lessers? The lines between beauty, power, and propriety were razor thin. But the real joke was on the lawmakers. As soon as one fabric or color was banned, a new fad appeared. Wealthy families commissioned tailor to invent ever more elaborate trimmings. New guilds arose, specializing in the fine art of legal evasion. The result, fashion moved faster than the law could keep up. Open scholarly debate. Did sumptuary laws actually work? Did they reinforce class distinctions or just give everyone a headache? Some historians argue that if nothing else, the laws created a sense of shared frustration, an equalizing annoyance that cut across rank. Others see them as largely symbolic, more about projecting authority than changing real behavior. In the village, things were simpler, but not immune to status signaling. The patch of embroidery or a new ribbon in your hair might make you the talk of the parish for weeks. Children were dressed plainly, but even they found ways to sneak in color. Dyed wool scraps or a lucky charm stitched to a sleeve. Market days and festivals were prime time to show off. Some families saved up for years to buy a bit of luxury fabric for a daughter's wedding dress, passing it down from mother to daughter as a cherished heirloom. But even for the humble, there were risks. A well-dressed farm girl might be mistaken for someone above her station, and that could bring trouble. Stories circulate of young women who donned their finest for a festival and attracted the unwanted attention of a local lord, or were accused of pretending to be more than they were. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, beauty could be both blessing and curse. Another quirky tidbit. In some places, strict sumptu laws created a black market for forbidden fashion. Smugglers trafficked in rare dyes, silks, and even finished garments, sneaking them over borders or through city gates, hidden in barrels of grain. Outlaws became unlikely trendsetters, with the daring and the desperate leading the way in underground couture. For the rich, the stakes were highest. One misplaced gemstone or too bright velvet could land you in court. Some try to outdo the laws themselves, dressing ever more extravagantly as a show of defiance or sometimes repentance. There are stories of noble women appearing in sackcloth after being fined, only to re-emerge at the next feast in something even more fabulous. It's easy to laugh at the absurdities. The lord with a train so long he needs 2 pages to carry it. The merchant's wife hiding silk sleeves under a plain wool cloak. But the anxiety was real. Beauty and fashion were ways to get ahead, yes, but also to make enemies, court danger, and spark envy or suspicion. You snuggle deeper under your blanket, grateful that your own pajamas aren't subject to government inspection. The medieval world, it turns out, was a universe of fabric and color codes. One where beauty was watched, weighed, and sometimes mercilessly policed. As you slip further into sleep, you realize that the pressure to look the part, to signal status, and worth through what you wear is one more way. The impossible standards of medieval beauty reached into every corner of daily life. And tomorrow, when you dream of wandering a bustling marketplace or attending a midnight feast, you'll know every ribbon, every hem, every glint of metal on your sleeve is a tiny, dangerous act of self-expression. You're floating in the warmth of your medieval blanket, imagining for a moment the delicate rustle of velvet and the soft glow off candles catching on gold thread. But now, as the dream shifts, you find yourself not in the bustling market or peasant field, but at court, where beautiful isn't just about how you look or what you wear, but about who sets the standards in the first place. Here you meet the true trendsetters, queens, kings, princesses, and dashing lords whose looks ripple out across kingdoms, shaping what everyone else aspires to, even if those ideals are as unattainable as a fairy tale castle. Mainstream historical fact. In nearly every kingdom and duchy across medieval Europe, the royal family, especially the queen, defined what it meant to be beautiful. Their portraits were copied, their fashions emulated, their peculiarities, quirks, or even perceived flaws transformed into the latest craze. Ella Lenina of Aquitaine's slender figure, Isabel of Bavaria's famously high forehead, and of Bohemia's delicate hands, all became symbols not just of royal status, but of beauty itself. Poets praised the snowy skin of Blanca of Castile, while treaters wrote love songs to Margaret of Anjou's raven hair. Whether you lived in a muddy village or a city palace, you knew the names and the looks of the era's celebrity royals. But the flip side, royal perfection was almost always out of reach for ordinary folk. The Queen had access to imported creams, rare perfumes, professional dresses, and the best of everything. Her look was achieved with a team, money, and sometimes outright deception. Portraits were often idealized, smoothed, and enhanced by artists eager to flatter. The result, beauty became not just impossible, but mythical. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some kings and queens became obsessed with setting the trend and not just following it. There's the story of Philip the Fair of France, who ordered all his courtiers to pluck their eyebrows and wear shoes with absurdly long points, insisting that the court must shine like the moon among stars. Or Isabella of France, who loved blue, so much that a queen's blue dye was developed just for her, and everyone who could afford it clamored to copy her exact shade. The royal look could have unexpected effects. When Queen Elizabeth of Hungary popularized rosemary water as a skin tonic, suddenly every noble woman wanted a bottle. Never mind that most couldn't afford the real thing. The wealthy hired apothecaries to make elaborate imitations. The poor soaked rosemary in rainwater and hoped for the best. Some women even slept with sprigs of the herb beneath their pillows, believing it would make them dream of beauty. For men, the stakes were equally high. When the king changed his look, grew a beard, tried a new hat, every noble scrambled to follow. Across Europe, courts bickered over feather heights and fabric folds. In England, King Edward IV's golden hair and towering height set the standard. Darker, shorter men, they had to work twice as hard just to be noticed. Some historians argue royal beauty ideals trickled down to everyone. Even the lowest born tried to echo the king's look, maybe a twist in the hair, or a scrap of colored cloth pinned just so. For those at court, though, beauty was no game. A single bad hair day could cost you status. Maids and valets rose early just to recreate the queen's image. Ladies risked their health with tight bodices and harsh creams, all for a fleeting glance from the monarch or a good bit of gossip. Even minor flaws, a mole, a limp, a sunburn could set tongues wagging. And strangely, royal imperfections often became trends. When Anne of Brittany's portrait showed slightly protruding ears, suddenly every woman in France seemed to have them. Later, Henry VIII's wide shoulders and ruddy cheeks reshaped English ideals, robust appetites, and a healthy flush became the new fashion. Even scars became symbols of status if they came with the right pedigree. These images weren't confined to palaces. They spread through portraits, coins, stained glass, even prayer books. Peasants who never saw a queen in person still recognized her face. Little girls named dolls after princesses. Women tied wedding ribbons to match royal styles. When the king threw a feast, fashion followed dotted dances and tournaments. Nobles showed off the newest trends. Poets praised. Troubadours teased. One daring outfitted dress made of peacock feathers or a face dusted with gold could become legendary. Of course, not everyone was impressed. Some churchmen warned that beauty led only to pride and sin. Street performers mocked the royals in satire, copying their struts and airs, and yet even pets joined the parade. The queen's dog might wear silk and jewels because it could. Sumptuary. Laws didn't apply to pets after all. But royal beauty wasn't just vanity. It was also a message. Queens used their image to signal power, virtue, even piety. In tapestries, they appeared as saints, wise women, or heroines, beauty serving something greater than fashion alone. A soft, calm expression suggested compassion. A firm jaw implied resolve. Even flaws could be spun. Elizabeth I's infamous pockmarks were hidden behind thick white makeup, and celebrated as a mark of her endurance. Beauty for the royal family was always a performance, always a message. Open scholarly debate. Did these images of perfection make ordinary people feel hopeful or just discouraged? Were queens and princesses role models or unreachable icons? Did courtly standards create admiration, resentment, or both? The chronicles disagree, and the answers shift with time and place. For the few who moved between worlds, merchants, daughters married to minor lords, scholars summoned to court, the contrast was dizzying. One moment you're in a world where a patch of lace is the height of fashion. The next you're back home where it's just a scrap of fabric. The pressure to adapt could be overwhelming and sometimes led to the invention of entirely new styles. A blending of city and country, rich and poor. And as always, there were the rebels. Now and then a prince refused to cut his hair, or a duchess appeared at a banquet in plain linen, shocking the court. Some royals even mocked the standards, dressing in disguise, playing practical jokes, or turning a trend upside down just to see who would follow. Sometimes the greatest beauty was in breaking the rules, not obeying them. You, meanwhile, wander through the palace of dreams, watching the flicker of torchlight on jewel-bright fabrics and listening to the soft whisper of silk. Tomorrow you'll wake up to your own reflection. Maybe a little less royal, but just as real. And if you find yourself longing for a new look, just remember the standards may change, but the urge to keep up or stand out is as old as crowns and castles. You stir, imagining the dazzling court receding into the distance, its glamour lingering, like the trace of a perfume. But medieval beauty was never just a matter of smooth skin, polished shoes, or royal fashions. It often came down to the quirks and oddities of the body itself. The stories people told, the charms they whispered, and the superstitions they harbored, all gave rise to a wild catalog of physical features considered beautiful, lucky, or sometimes deeply suspect. Tonight you find yourself squinting at your own reflection, wondering, would your traits have been a blessing or a curse in the Middle Ages? Are you the lucky owner of a dimpled chin or a single dramatic eyebrow? In this world, the line between beauty and peculiarity is as thin as a single lock of hair. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval sources brim with comments on physical quirks, both celebrated and feared. Some features were universally admired. Dimples in cheeks or chins were linked to luck and laughter, while a well-shaped nose, neither too sharp nor too flat, could hint at noble lineage. Yet others, like freckles, moles, or birthmarks, drew suspicion, rumored to be the witch's mark or a sign of sin. Tales abounded of lovers swooning for a perfectly cleft chin or a mysterious beauty spot, while others might recoil at a single stray hair in the wrong place. Let's start with dimples, a quirky tidbit and a favorite in many regions. Songs, poems, and folktales praised girls with dimples as deep as the king's coffers, or a chin with its own little smile. These features suggested a cheerful spirit, youthful health, and the favor of fate. In some parts of France and England, parents would gently press a newborn's cheeks, hoping to encourage dimples and bring lifelong luck. For boys, a strong cleft chin or dimple was seen as a mark of courage or future greatness. Then there's the unibrow, the meeting of eyebrows into a single line above the eyes. Across southern Europe and the eastern Mediterranean, this was not just acceptable, but celebrated. A bold unibrow signaled intelligence, power, and sensuality. Mothers painted in extra darkness. Young women traced charcoal between their brows. And poets praised the single arc above twin stars. In Byzantium and Moorish Spain, a strong brow meant a strong mind. Yet in northern and western Europe, the unibrow became a point of mockery, proof that beauty is always in the eye of the beholder, or perhaps the beholder's neighbor. There's an open scholarly debate on why these regional differences persisted. Was it a matter of climate, culture, or the wandering whims of art and poetry? Some say ancient Roman ideals lingered in the south, while the north followed its own path of pale foreheads and vanishing brows. Moles and birthmarks posed their own puzzle. In some eras, a well-placed mole, a beauty spot on the cheek or above the lip, was prized. The inspiration for delicate silk patches, as you heard in Section 8. But too many spots or one in an unlucky place sparked rumors of witchcraft or devil's bargains. Superstition hung heavy over the body. A mole on your left shoulder could bring misfortune, while one on your right cheek might make you irresistible. There are even records of wise women paid to read moles and freckles, promising glimpses into your future or your past. Dimples and moles weren't the only quirks in demand. A small gap between the front teeth was called a lucky tooth, or teeth of happiness in parts of France, associated with good singing and quick wit. In Germany, a rosy birthmark was seen as a mark of the fairy blessed. In some Slavic countries, a woman with naturally red hair was both admired for her beauty and feared for her supposed magic. The line between admiration and anxiety was always shifting, always unstable. Joke break. Why did Lady Cecily draw a tiny heart on her cheek before the feast? Because Sir Geoffrey said he'd only dance with a woman marked by love, and she wasn't. Leaving anything to chance. But for every blessed feature, there was one that spelled trouble. Crooked fingers, extra toes, or devil's marks. Random discoloration, scars, or even unusual freckles could mean a life of gossip, exclusion, or even trial. The infamous witch hunts of the late medieval period relied on hunting for such signs. More than one poor soul spent a lifetime hiding a mole or a birthmark, just in case the wrong person saw it. The open scholarly debate here centers on how much these beliefs actually affected everyday life. Some historians point to court records and folktales as proof that physical quirks could change destinies. Others argue that most people simply lived with what they had, relying on the right story, charm, or fashionable patch to turn a curse into a blessing. And then there were odd charms, things people carried, wore, or whispered to encourage beauty, or ward off the evil eye. In Italy, coral beads were worn to protect children's complexions and keep freckles at bay. In Ireland, a pinch of earth from a churchyard tucked in your shoe would guard against unwanted moles. In France, girls sometimes tied ribbons in their hair to draw beauty from the dawn. Magic and medicine danced together in the quest for a perfect face. These quirks also played out in medieval art. Look closely at illuminated manuscripts or the stone faces of a cathedral, and you'll see a wild parade of noses, brows, chins, and cheeks. Each distinct, each carefully rendered, a reminder that ideals were both celebrated and subverted. Some artists exaggerated dimples or arched brows for comic effect. Others hid secret symbols in a beauty mark or lock of hair, messages for those who knew where to look. For those with unusual features, life could be a challenge. A pronounced scar might spark suspicion. A pronounced dimple could open doors. Children grew up hearing stories of the legendary beauty who danced with a rose birthmark, or the clever rogue whose gaptoothed grin won the heart of a duchess. Folklore became a survival guide. What to show, what to hide, how to turn a liability into an asset. One last quirky tidbit. In some villages, the local healer or wise woman would anoint a baby's face with the first snow or the juice of a spring flower, hoping to shape its features for good fortune. These rituals might seem strange, but at heart they were just expressions of hope, a wish that a child would find acceptance and admiration in a world where beauty could open doors or close them forever. As you settle deeper beneath your blanket, you start to marvel at the strangeness of medieval beauty. Every crooked smile, every freckle, every superstitious ribbon, it all had meaning. Nothing was uniform, and that was part of the charm. Tonight, your quirks aren't flaws, they're stories. Each one, a thread in the odd, shimmering fabric of the past. You imagine a world lit by candlelight and whispered prayer sand. If we're honest, some very questionable smells. Because in medieval times, beauty wasn't just what you saw, It was what you sensed. Sense ruled just as much as sight. You drift through perfumed courts and smoky village huts, unraveling a tale of bathing taboos, fragrant rituals, and the strange art of smelling beautiful. For the wealthy, imported oils and rare spices were status symbols. Rosewater from Persia, musk from the East, a drop behind the ear could mark you as refined. But for most, true cleanliness was out of reach. Full baths were rare, even discouraged seen as dangerous, opening the body to illness. In cities, public bathhouses once thrived, but many closed during plagues, labeled as dens of sin. At home, people settled for a quick wipe of the hands, face, and feet. Maybe a dusting of herbs or a spritz of rose water if you could afford it. Bathing too often? Not recommended. Instead, the rich turned to dry bathing, rubbing themselves down with linen soaked in herb infusions, then finishing with powders of lavender, rosemary, and sage. These left skin scented and soft, but still not exactly clean. Ironically, nobles sometimes smelled better but were actually dirtier than peasants who bathed in rivers when the weather allowed. For women, fragrance became a kind of armor. A well-scented lady could drift through a crowded hall, leaving whispers in her wake. Did you smell Lady Blanche's jasmine water? They wore scented gloves, perfumed jewelry, and pomanderstini, ornate balls filled with herbs stuck into sleeves or held to the nose, thought to ward off plague and foul air. Both a fashion statement and a quiet act of survival. Historians still argue over just how stinky the Middle Ages really were. Some records insist that the wealthy were surprisingly fastidious, washing and changing clothes more often than we assume. Others paint a world of overwhelming odor, human, animal, culinary, and chemical, especially in crowded towns where chamber pots emptied onto the streets. The truth, likely both. Bursts of heady perfume in the palace, honest sweat in the field. And everywhere, the tang of woodsome smoke, wet wool, and life lived close to Theland. Joke break. Why did Sir Roland always win at hide and seek? Because you could smell everyone else before you saw them. Not all scents were desirable. Medieval homes were filled with strong odor from open hearths, tallow candles, fermented foods, and livestock. To fight these, even the poorest families hung bundles of dried herbs from rafters or tucked mint and thyme in chests of linen. Some households scattered rushes on the floor, regularly refreshed and perfumed with meadowsweet or lavenderdo, masked the less pleasant realities below. The open scholarly debate. Did medieval folk simply endure the smells, or did they actively fight back with every means available? Some anthropologists argue that the medieval nose was less sensitive, or at least less bothered by odor we find appalling. Others counter that the records of perfume recipes and scented linen prove a universal human desire to mask and modify the world through fragrance. For men, the art of scent was just as fraught. Knights and courtiers were expected to appear both powerful and pleasant. A bad-smelling man might be accused of laziness, drunkenness, or worst of all, poor breeding. Some noblemen carried scented handkerchiefs or wore sachets of herbs in their doublets. It was said that Richard the Lionheart could be tracked across his campsites by the trail of rosewater left behind. Perhaps more legend than fact, but a legend with its own kind of truth. Peasants, meanwhile, had to make do with what grew nearby. A country girl might wash her hair with rosemary or rub her arms with crushed mint before the harvest festival. Old wives taught their daughters the secrets of wild flowers, how to steep elder flowers for a quick rinse, or carry a sprig of pennyroyal in a bodice for protection and pleasantness. Some rural traditions praise the scent of fresh earth and hay as honest and healthy, a badge of a good day's work. The church had its own relationship with scent. Incense, frankincense, and myrrh transformed cathedrals into realms of the sacred. Their fragrance meant to call the mind heavenward. In the quiet corners of monasteries, monks tended fragrant gardens that just for medicine, but for beauty. Sage, rosemary, parsley, herbs believed to sweeten breath, soften sweat, even perfume your dreams. Garlic, though, best avoided if you hoped for a kiss at the midsummer fair. Scents spoke volumes. The tang of vinegar marked a healer. Amber meant wealth. Smoke and spice on a man's cloak? Maybe he'd returned from far-off lands, or just scored a good trade in the market. And in every home, little sachets of herbs were tucked into sleeves, purses, and between bed linens equal parts perfume and pest control. Even sleep was scented. Pillows stuffed with lavender, sheets misted with rosewater, hair ribbons carrying notes of rosemary. Before bed, some burned juniper in the hearth to soothe dreams or ward off illness. But not all advice aged well. Some texts warned that too much fragrance stirred sinful thoughts. Others believed a touch of musk showed good health, something raw, real, and not to be scrubbed away. Peasants mocked the nobles' delicate noses. They preferred the honest scent of hay, fresh bread, and rain. So where does beauty lie, vine perfection? Or in what lingers after we've gone? Maybe both. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, the medieval night wraps around you. The cool breath of stone, a hint of lavender, the distant smoke of a village hearth. You'll wake tomorrow to your familiar world, but for now, let yourself wander through this garden of forgotten. Fragrance each one, a whisper from the past. And in the flickering candlelight of memory, the ancient desire remains to soften, to shimmer, to change the face we show the world, to add color, to erase flaws, to dream ourselves new, again and again. Tonight, you tumble headlong into the strange, risky world of medieval cosmetics. Powders, rouges, and secret recipes where the line between beauty and danger is as thin as a dusting of lead. Mainstream historical fact. By the late Middle Ages, cosmetics were not just for queens and courtiers. Women and occasionally men across Europe experimented with homemade and purchased concoctions to perfect their faces. Peluskin remained the standard, so whitening powders were in constant demand. Women crushed white lead, chalk, or ground bone to dust, mixing them with vinegar or rosewater to create a thick, sticky paste. The result, a porcelain mask that might look divine by candlelight, but which slowly poisoned the wearer day by day. That's the first uncomfortable truth. The most effective cosmetics were, by modern standards, highly toxic. Lead, mercury, and arsenic appeared in recipes everywhere. Blended with egg white for smoothing, with vinegar to strip oils, or with honey to set a finish. Early physicians warned of rashes, trembling hands, and melting skin. But the pressure for beauty was relentless. You might have known deep down that your morning routine was dangerous, but the lure of flawless skin was hard to resist. Quirky tidbit. Medieval makeup wasn't just about the skin. Some fashionistas mixed soot or lamp, black with animal fat to darken their eyelashes and brows. An early mascara applied with sticks or tiny brushes. Redocker or ground cochial beetles provided color for the cheeks and lips, while a dab of honey kept rouge in place. There's even evidence of women rubbing cut beets or mulberries onto their cheeks for a natural flush. Imagine facing the day with your lips stained bright as a berry, hoping the effect would last through feasts, dances, or long hours at market. But there were subtler tricks too. To create the illusion of higher cheekbones, some women applied a faint shadow of gray or blue, powder under the eyes or along the jaw. Centuries before, contouring would become a modern craze. Want a sparkle in your eye? A dab of egg white on the eyelids promised a glossy shine, while a sprinkle of ground pearls made the skin gleam like the moon. For lips, red was the rage. Recipes survived for crimson salves made of madder root, alkanet, or even sheep's blood thickened with wax or tallow. The bolder the color, the better. And yet, in some regions, especially among the pious, too much makeup was seen as sinful, the mark of vanity, or even witchcraft. There was a constant tension. Look beautiful, but not too beautiful. Stand out, but only in the right way. Historians still argue about how widely makeup was used among the lower classes. Some sources insist that peasants shunned cosmetics as a sign of idleness or loose morals, while others point to records of rural women tinting their cheeks with berry juice or lightening their skin with flour on festival days. Open scholarly debate continues. Was makeup a symbol of liberation or submission, rebellion or conformity? Was it truly widespread or mostly confined to court and city? Of course, not every ingredient was dangerous. Medieval women and men loved rose water for its gentle scent and mild cleansing properties. Almond oil, beeswax, and honey could soften skin, and herbal rinses soothed irritations. If you were lucky, your local apothecary or wise woman knew which recipes would help and which were best left to the bravest or most desperate of beauty seekers. But some sort out the strangest recipes, convinced that magic, alchemy, or the blessing of a saint could transform them. Manuscripts record instructions for celestial water, a blend of dew collected before sunrise, mixed with herbs and a whispered prayer. Others swore by frog spawn ointment for banishing freckles, or by a pus of mashed snails to erase wrinkles. Beauty, in the medieval world, hovered always at the edge of the miraculous and the absurd. Let's break for a joke. Why did Lady Joan stop wearing her favorite rouge? Because every time it rained, shell left red streaks down her cheeks and a trail of confused suitors. Cosmetics could also be a weapon. Rival ladies competed in the art of subtle alteration, using powders and pastes to outshine one another at feasts and festivals. There are stories of a noble woman mixing lamp black into her rival's face cream, ensuring a disastrous result before the king's banquet. Rumors flew through courts who was faking beauty, who relied on devil's dust, whose glowing complexion was a little too good to be true. Yet, makeup could also be empowering. For a woman with a birthmark, a scar, or simply the wrong color of cheeks, cosmetics offered a measure of control. Some saw the face as a canvas, a space to play with color, shadow, and light. A clever application might hide the signs of illness, fatigue, or heartbreak, or send a secret signal, a scarlet lip, or a bold brow meant only for a chosen admirer. But it was risky. Beyond the slow, creeping dangers of lead and mercury, there was the threat of exposure. Priests and preachers railed against vanity. Jealous rivals might whisper that your beauty was a lie. The line between art and deceit was always blurred. Some married women painted their faces in secret, scrubbing off every trace before their husbands returned home. Open scholarly debate. Did men secretly admire the artifice, or did they truly prefer natural beauty? Letters and poems from the period suggest both. A fascination with the mysterious power of painted faces, and a longing for the simplicity, or at least the imagined simplicity, of unadorned skin. Men, too, dabbled in cosmetics, though more discreetly. A touch of powder to mask redness, a smear of scented wax on the mustache, or even a little color on the lips for feasts or courtly plays. These were not unheard of. Knights competing in tournaments sometimes dusted their armor and faces with gold powder, hoping to catch a lady's eye. The pursuit of beauty was, after all, universal. One last quirky tidbit. In some cities, cosmetic guilds sprang up. Early associations of perfumers, apothecaries, and beauty experts who competed for the business of the rich and powerful. Recipes were fiercely guarded secrets passed down through generations or sold for fortunes. The rivalry between these guilds was legendary, with accusations of sabotage, theft, and even attempted poisoning. Beauty, it seemed, could be a dangerous trade. So you lie there, eyes closed, picturing a world of flickering mirrors in secret. Jars where every face was both mask and message. In the medieval night, the wish for beauty was both hope and hazard. A powder-dusted tightrope walked between admiration and danger, innovation and disaster. As sleep pulls you further under, you Smile, relieved perhaps that your own makeup routine is a little less lethal. But part of you wonders at the courage, creativity, and sheer audacity of the men and women who risked everything for the hope of being, if only for an evening, impossibly beautiful. As you curl deeper under your blanket, you realize medieval beauty wasn't dictated by courts, cosmetics, or curious charms alone. It was shaped just as fiercely by the church. Tonight you slip into a world where faith and appearance are so closely intertwined that even your reflection seems to whisper, "Are you pious enough to be pretty?" Welcome to the shadowy crossroads of holiness, guilt, and the impossible standards. Of beauty set not by artists or royals, but by priests and saints. Mainstream historical fact. Throughout the Middle Ages, Christianity, especially as interpreted by the Catholic Church, profoundly influenced attitudes toward the body. Physical beauty was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was seen as a reflection of God's grace, proof that the soul was well-ordered and favored by heaven. Medieval sermons and treatises are littered with the language of radiance, purity, and the beauty of holiness. On the other, the Church taught that pride in one's looks was a dangerous temptation. Vanity, after all, was a sin. In extreme forms, it was linked to the devil and the fall of man. So you awaken in a world of contradiction. In church, illuminated saints glow with perfect pale faces, unblemished and serene, while outside, preachers thunder against the painted cheeks and plucked brows of fashionable women. The result, an endless, exhausting push and pull, striving for beauty, then apologizing for it, then striving again. In art and hagiography, saints are often depicted as ethereal, white skin, golden hair, and placid expressions. The Virgin Mary sets the ultimate ideal, a face as calm as moonlight, a body untainted by labor or sin. In the glow of stained glass and frescoes, holiness was imagined as spotless, serene, and eternally young. For women, the pressure was relentless. Your body wasn't really yours. It was a vessel to be judged, not only for purity, but for beauty too. Even in convents, beauty had its place. Not vanity, but saintly imitation. Young nuns rinsed their faces with rose water, tucked herbs behind their ears to keep the mind lifted. But too pale, too tired, you might earn a gentle scolding. A glowing face, they said, inspired devotion. Still, the Church's relationship with beauty was anything but simple. Was it about spiritual discipline or control? Scholars still debate. Some say the condemnation of vanity helped enforce social order. Others argue the Church, at times, praised natural beauty as a divine gift. And yet, beauty was always double-edged. Saints and angels were celebrated for their radiance, but women who looked too lovely, they risked being seen as witches, temptresses. Even men weren't spared. Too much concern for appearance could invite accusations of vanity. Or worse, mirror-gazing, especially on Sundays, was frowned upon. Joke break. Why did Brother Martin hide the monastery's only mirror? So the novices would stop checking for halos and start praying. But behind the humor lay tension, especially in tales of female saints. They were radiant, yet they veiled their faces. They cut their hair. They renounced all adornment. Some even disfigured themselves willingly, ashes on their skin, coarse hair shirts beneath their robes. Wounds inflicted not to flee beauty, but to reshape it into something holy. Because in those stories, the ultimate beauty wasn't youth or glow, it was suffering, the glow of martyrdom, the radiance of pain. And for ordinary women, it was confusing. Could you braid your hair for a feast without risking your soul? Folk wisdom searched for middle ground, a ribbon blessed with holy water, a cross pendant worn for both beauty and protection, a whispered prayer that your new dress wouldn't turn your heart toward pride. The men weren't immune either. Monks and priests cultivated their own aesthetic look, shaved heads, plain habits, bare feet. Yet saints' lives often emphasized their gentle countenances or sweet voices. Even the bearded anchorites who lived alone in the wilds were described as shining with the inner beauty of grace. The open scholarly debate persists. Did church teachings about beauty and power or in prison? Did they offer a haven for those who felt alienated from secular standards? Or did they simply replace a set of impossibilities with another? Was the obsession with spiritual beauty a genuine comfort, or just a way to mask anxiety about the flesh? Quirky tidbit. Medieval churchgoers sometimes carried small mirrors engraved with prayers or saintly images, an attempt to blend vanity and piety in a single object. There's even a record of a bishop scolding a congregation for spending more time polishing these holy mirrors than their own souls. The liturgical year became a calendar of changing standards. During Lent and Advent, simplicity and sobriety were required. No makeup, jewelry, or elaborate hair. Easter and Christmas, by contrast, allowed for a return to color, ornament, and feasting, if done in the right spirit. There are charming tales of village girls hurrying to church in flower crowns on Easter morning, hoping to honor both God and the season's beauty. Not all clergy were severe. Some local priests turned a blind eye to the latest hair ribbon or kohl-lined eye, recognizing that a bit of adornment brought joy to the weary. Others became infamous for their own love of finery, embroidered stalls, jeweled crosses, or silk-lined robes. The contradiction was everywhere. Beauty was both a threat and a blessing, a sin and a sacrament. You close your eyes, hearing the distant echo of bells and the soft murmur of evening prayer. In the medieval world, to be beautiful was to walk a narrow ridge between pride and piety, desire and discipline. Every act of self-care, every new gown or dab of rosewater was weighed against fear of falling. Yet for all its warnings and prohibitions, the church never truly banished the hope for beauty. It simply gave it new meanings, new stories, new rituals. As you drift towards sleep, you find comfort in the knowledge that people of every age have wrestled with these questions. Am I enough? Am I too much? Is it wrong to wish for admiration or right to seek out grace? The answers shift, but the longing stays. In the silence, you offer your own quiet prayer. For a beauty that doesn't have veto hurt, for peace with the body you call home. You turn in your sleep, carried onward by the soft echoes of church bells and the afterglow of candle-lit prayers. But tonight's journey isn't finished. Not until you've wandered the wildest, most enchanted places where medieval beauty took root. The world of legends, myths, and fairy tales. For every law and sermon, there was a story spun by firelight, whispered in secret, etched in illuminated margins, about faces and bodies so impossibly perfect they could never quite exist in the waking world. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval Europe was a world shaped by stories as much as by sermons or royal proclamations. The beautiful in these tales were the princesses, knights, fae, or saints, set ideals so dazzling and remote that real mortals could only dream, envy, or despair. In romance poems, fairy tales, and miracle legends, beauty wasn't just difficult to achieve. It was supernatural, often dangerous, and sometimes even a curse. Imagine you're a child again, huddled beside your grandmother's knee as she recites the tale of a maiden whose hair spilled down the castle steps like golden water, or a knight whose face shone so bright it blinded the wicked. These images lived, not just in words, but in tapestries, stained glass, and carved church screens. Storybook beauty standards filtered into daily life, creeping into wedding rituals, carnival games, even the hopes and fears of parents gazing at their newborns. Take the ever-popular legend of the Swan Maiden. Her skin whiter than snow, lips red as blood, hair dark as night. The fairy tale became a template. Skin like ivory, eyes like stars, lips like rose petals repeated, until even peasant girls dreamed of beauty they'd never seen. The heroines weren't just queens or neighbors, but mythical ideals, unreachable and glowing with enchantment. Some standards came straight from the supernatural. In parts of France and Germany, they whispered that only a girl with a moon-shaped face could see fairies, or a boy with mirror-clear eyes might glimpse the devil. And pity the child born with freckles or crooked teeth, surely the result of fairy mischief or a mother's sin. Men, too, had their myths. Epic poems praised golden-haired knights with marble limbs and the strength of oxen. One tale spoke of a hero so radiant, his golden beard frightened horses and stunned maidens. But beauty was a double-edged gift. It might win a queen's lover, stir a sorcerer's envy. Like Lancelot, whose perfect face became both his blessing and his downfall. Did these tales raise the bar for everyone? Or offer a dreamy escape where magic might make anyone beautiful? Historians debate. Some say the stories only deepened our obsession with appearance. Others believe they offered comfort, a world where ugliness could be redeemed, where the overlooked could be loved. These beliefs seeped into real life. Brides wore garlands to borrow fairy blessings. Mothers buttered their baby's skin, wishing for elven smoothness. Some girls left offerings under trees, praying for beauty, grace, maybe even a good marriage. And if that failed, a sprig of rosemary tucked in a shift, a dried flower pinned for luck. Little charms to summon magic in a world where beauty was both a gift and a test, because fairy tales warned us two prideful maidens turned into beasts, of girls lost in the woods. Beauty had to be earned, guarded, even suffered for. In the Ballad of Tamlin, a girl holds fast to her lover as he turns into fire. Water, wild beasts for the chance to save him and to restore his beauty. Even the church tried to steer us from these glittering traps. Saints became their own legends, virgins radiant in purity, martyrs glowing in their wounds. Wise old women, wrinkled but holy, transformed not by rouge, but by miracle. And yet, even these stories set impossible standards. Skin so flawless it glowed in the grave. Bodies so light they floated from tombs. Art echoed the fantasy, central figures impossibly perfect, while margins mocked with grotesques and grimaces. A wink to say, we know this isn't real, but still, the mythic lovers endure. Serene, untouched, forever beautiful. Beauty and art was idealized, not observed. Even portraits of real people were corrected by artists, their flaws smoothed away with a brushstroke and a little artistic license. These ideals weren't confined to the upper classes. The oral tradition, songs, riddles, and tales passed from village to village, spread the standards far and wide. There's a Welsh lullaby about a baby as bright as the rowan moon. A Czech proverb that claims, a girl without wrinkles is like a night without stars. Sometimes beauty was celebrated in its diversity. Sometimes it was narrowed down to a single fantastical mold. Open scholarly debate. Did these legends liberate or oppress? Were they an excuse to daydream or another way to enforce the rules? Some folklorists argue that the most lasting stories are those where beauty turns out to be a trick, where the plain, the clever, or the kind-hearted triumph in the end. Think of Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, or the Loathly Lady tales, where a spell or an act of mercy reveals true loveliness beneath the surface. For the outcast, the one whose nose was too big, whose hair too wild, whose skin too brown or scarred. These stories might sting, but they could also give hope. Maybe someday, the girl might whisper, a fairy godmother will find me too. And sometimes beauty was its own kind of magic, a forbidden love, a dance under the new moon, a secret wish carried in the heart. One last quirky tidbit. In some villages, it was believed that if you wanted to grow beautiful, you had to sleep with a book of fairy tales under your pillow, or failing that, with a mirror wrapped in a red ribbon. No one could say if it worked, but it made for sweeter dreams. As you drift toward morning, fairy tales swirl in the darkness. A shimmer of gold hair, a flash of silver eyes, a kiss that turns a frog into a prince. You understand at last that the greatest power of these impossible standards was not in their cruelty, but in their promise. If only, they whispered, you could be beautiful, everything would change. The world never stopped believing, even if beauty itself was as slippery as a story and as fleeting as a dream. You've wandered through castles and cathedrals, trudged muddy village roads, and stared into the polished mirrors of lords and saints. Alike, now as the medieval night winds down, you find yourself among the ordinary people. The bakers, weavers, plowmen, maids, who faced beauty standards both relentless and absurd, yet somehow found ways to survive, rebel, or simply make peace with themselves. Because in the end, the history of medieval beauty isn't just about pain and poison, luxury, and legend. Is about how real people coped, compromised, and sometimes found a way to feel at home in their own skin. You lie there picturing yourself as an ordinary medieval villager. Your feet are broad from years in the fields. Your hands are calloused and stained. Your hair never quite gleams the way it's supposed to in the old ballads. Maybe your brow isn't high or pale enough, your gown too rough, your teeth a little gapped from years of tough bread. Maybe you've heard 100 stories about queens with golden hair, or saints whose beauty glows like a star. But your world is smaller, marked by muddy boots, laughter in the market, the scent of onions and wood smoke. Mainstream historical fact. For the vast majority of medieval people, daily survival mattered more than chasing the latest courtly ideal. Beauty rituals for most were simple. A little lard for cracked hands, a comb made from bone or horn, a splash of cold water in the morning, a braid or ribbon on festival days. Homemade beauty was born of thrift and necessity. In the countryside, sun-browned skin and strong arms were seen as proof of good health and hard work, sometimes even quietly admired, if not celebrated in the poetry of the elite. Yet even in villages, echoes of impossible standards still reached every hearth. The bride whose hair was too dark, the farmhand whose face bore a childhood scar, the old widow whose wrinkles deepened each year. They all knew what perfection was supposed to look like. Some tried to chase it, a little flour dabbed on cheeks for a wedding, rosemary rinses before a fair, or a blue thread woven into hair to invoke fairy luck. Others scoffed, laughing at the absurdities of the city or the follies of the rich, content to let their quirks and oddities go unpolished. Quirky tidbit. There are folk tales of women hiding their best features, braiding long hair up beneath a cap, or muddying their faces before market day to avoid the gaze of greedy lords. Asterisk. And so, as the night settles and the embers fade, you lie beneath your blanket, no longer chasing perfection, but holding close the quiet truths that endured beneath it. Maybe beauty was never meant to be flawless. Maybe it lived in laughter shared around a fire, in a freckled face lit by joy, in the worn hands of someone who's loved well and worked hard. Stories were grand queens with luminous skin, saints untouched by time, heroines kissed by magic, but they were never the only stories. In fields and kitchens, on festival days and quiet walks home, people created their own beauty. Humble, imperfect, stubbornly real. And in that, there was freedom. You don't need golden hair or porcelain skin to be remembered. A kind word, a crooked smile, a song at dusk, that, too, is a kind of grace. So now, rest. Let go of old mirrors and heavy crowns. The world tonight is soft and still, and you, just as you are part of its gentle light. Close your eyes. You're enough. Sleep well, traveler.